Hey there, everybody. My name's Brian, and I am with Trillix. Today, we're going to be talking about bridging with regards to Web3, how it's done, and whether or not some of these things can be rethought or ought to be rethought. Um, you know, uh, First of all, bridging is not new, right? This is how value is moved between entities, locations, currencies, in and out of property worldwide. It's not, it's been around for eons, generations, thousands of years, however you want to think about it. But its implementation on Web3 is a little bit interesting. Generally speaking, what we see here is what I like to call an interested party exchange. And what that means is I am interested, or both parties are interested in the outcome and the value that's being moved. Whether that's me, and I'm moving my own tokens between two different chains, for example, um, whether we're doing a token swap between, either for me or for someone else between one currency type into another somewhere else, or we're doing some combination of the two with different entities, for example. Um, Most of the time on Web3, in fact, pretty much all the times that I can think of, in Web3, we do this by taking the interested parties and we combine them together in a way that's going to be able to um, move that value um, in a place where both sides are interested. So let me, and logically they're the most vulnerable. So you've got something that you care about. You're going to do something with it, which is going to fundamentally change its nature. Whether you're changing the location of the asset, whether you're changing the type of asset, whether you're changing the holder of the asset, none of that matters. You're basically changing the fundamental nature of the value itself. And you're trying to do that in a way that is safe, secure, and beneficial to both parties. In order to do that, as you see here, if I use actor A and actor B, you're making some assumptions. Number one, that the other side is not going to cheat. Um, that number two, that the exchange rate is fair, reasonable, and can be computed in a time fast enough so that that value doesn't fundamentally change during the process of the transaction itself. That there's no loss or gain for either commodity during the transfer that ends up resulting in an unfair exchange. Inevitably in the first place, and that the other side's going to be able to execute their portion of the exchange properly, safely, and in a way that can be proven. That's great. And there's a variety of ways that happens. You can go and look those up. Generally, the process has a collaboration mechanism that uses at least two contracts, usually one on opposite sides of the chain. The trouble is, you would never really do this in real life because there's too much implicit trust in sides that you don't control involved here. In fact, think about the notion of escrow, right? This is something that was designed specifically to handle this particular situation because you're taking a time where the participants are at their most vulnerable, which is I'm trying to change one of the fundamental natures of the thing that I'm trading. Um, and then you're asking them to have as much resiliency, trust, and lack of vulnerability that you possibly can in that same moment. If you're buying a car, you wouldn't go to the buyer as a seller of a car and say something like, "Okay, I tell you what." You take it home and then send me the money for it because I trust that you're good for it. If it was your uncle, maybe, or your brother, but for somebody that you just met that morning, that's not going to happen. And what do we do instead? We use something like escrow. And escrow is a perfect example of what I like to call a disinterested third party exchange. In this case, what we do is we bring in a third party that provides that trust and safety, that efficiency, the capability to coordinate things like rollback, and they don't derive the value from the actual assets. they derive value from the transaction itself. This means that they are incented to ensure that the mechanism by which the exchange is happening is done properly, but they don't have a shared interest in the actual asset. So again, look at escrow. In that car situation that I explained before, you would have a car that's moving. The escrow agent's not actually interested in the car because they only get paid once the transaction is successful. The car moves over to the buyer, and the buyer moves their money over to the seller. That seller confirms that the money is moved. Then the escrow agent gets their piece of the pie. So it's not in their interest to back one side over the other. Rather, their interest is about making the entire transaction fluid. This is what we're talking about as a plan for Trilix. We are looking at ways in which we can bring third-party verification services like escrow or trust services like notaries and title services to distributed transactions in Web3. Whether that's on the same chain, across chains, between currency types, between actors, between value mechanisms like in a swap. All of these situations really do pretty much beg for the notion of this disinterested third-party exchange. Now, it's going to take a while to get there. We're not trying to kid anyone on that. But we think that it's not only doable, but it is actually the key to being able to adopt multi-chain transactions at scale, especially for non-Web3 folks. Right now, most of the transactions that are happening are between entities that are relatively familiar with the platform, and that's great. But it's that same situation where you can't bring your grandma through the process of bridging a token between Binance Smart Chain and Avalanche right now. That takes some understanding and skill in the art to be able to pull off. And quite frankly, you can't scale the financial system that way. It has to be something where the transaction itself feels secondary to the value transfer. When you're buying a car, again, you don't think of escrow as the primary transaction that you're doing. You think of yourself as buying a car. You think of the friction that the agent and the process might cause as something that is annoying, but it's necessary in order to be able to ensure the value and the safety of that transaction. That's the level that you've got to at least achieve. We hope to be a part of the solution for everybody, not just in our own work, but for the entire Web3 ecosystem. So look for it.